Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. Please take a seat. My name is Andrew Beer, and I'm the concertmaster of the Auckland Philharmonia Orchestra. It's really great to be here with all of you today, to be back in Queenstown again, see the remarkable remarkables. Of course, we've got 16 remarkable candidates this year as well. And today is the day that 16 goes down to 6. If you stick around till the evening, we'll see who makes it through. We also have a real all-star cast of 7 jury members this year from all over the world. So you could say that for the candidates, it's a great opportunity to perform for 7 premier soloists. But if you know Victor Borge and his inflationary English, he would have said it better. He would have said, it's a Gurnayan opportunity, 3 per 5 and 5, 8 secondary duelists. Okay, no more jokes. Get to the serious stuff. I'd like to talk today about the sonata repertoire, the duo sonata repertoire. And if there's just one important point that I could get across to you today, it's that just about everything else you've heard so far in the competition, from Bach to Paganini to the salon pieces, is really where the violin is the star. This is a little different. This is chamber music. These are duo sonatas. So as much as the violin gets to lead the melody, the phrasing, they also have to follow the piano. So it's very much a conversation between 2 people. And for the 6 that make it on to the semi-final round, they're going to play the Mozart quintets, which is more chamber music. So this is a great test today and yesterday. Good. It's always interesting to look at the repertoire that the candidates choose. Popular options are usually the Ravel sonata and either of the Prokofievs, Prokofiev 1 or 2. Actually, nobody has picked either of those, any of those pieces this year. But we do have 5 Grieg sonatas. So I thought I would start talking a bit about that. The Grieg sonata was written in 1887, actually just a year after the Franck, in the same year as the Brahms 3rd sonata. So it was a really great year for sonata writing. Good. One thing I can say about Grieg is that he loves very short thematic ideas, short melodies. So it starts just like this. Short and to the point. But actually not short enough for Grieg, because if you hear later, I'll just play that again on the piano so you hear the chord underneath. And then just a bit later, you hear this. So that's actually just the first 2 notes of the opening statement. And then let's jump to the development section. A theory teacher of mine in undergrad used to say that the development section is where all the good stuff happens in the music. The development here, what we're doing is exploring all the themes and looking for a way to come back, go through a lot of keys, and then come back to this opening statement. But what Grieg does is play that 2-note idea from the beginning over and over again in different keys. Etc., down and down. It can actually be quite boring if it's not played well, so a challenge here for the candidates is to time it well, to tell a great dramatic story. So after actually over a minute of that just 2-note mode of being played over and over again, we think that we've come back. Not quite though. If you remember the opening, C minor, the bass is different. And the melody is twice as slow here, so that's what we call a false recap. We haven't quite gotten there yet. And then we have this chromatic line here. And he goes through many keys with that as well. So he goes this key, here, and then again, C minor, so we think maybe we've arrived. Still not, actually. Still that wrong note in the bass. This is my favorite spot here. So that's again the melody, but it's 4 times slower now. Super dramatic. And then finally, he takes another aspect of the melody. And then we arrive. So it's this great moment, kind of in the tradition of Beethoven, where you know what's supposed to come. It's supposed to be the real rival of the theme, but Grieg makes you wait for it, and when it finally gets there, it's so exciting. Love it. The second movement of the Grieg is just one of the most gorgeous melodies of all time in the sonata repertoire. Now, I said that Grieg loves short thematic ideas. This would seem to go contrary to that because it's this legato, very long, unending melody. It's actually just two really short ideas, the rise and the fall. So during the performances today, just listen out for how that same material comes back over and over again, but you forget about it because it's this beautiful long line that the violin and the piano play. There's these spectacular moments where Grieg gives us not what we expect. Here, we expect this. But he gives us this instead. That's called third relations. I won't get into technical details, but that's something that Wagner used a lot in his music in the late Romantic period, and it was sort of influencing all other composers. What it means is that a different color is created when you don't expect it. So what the candidates need to do here is create different colors on the violin. There's many ways we could do that. We could just show a couple examples maybe. So the second one's probably darker color maybe, or certainly more distant. So possibly we could play the first one with a nice healthy vibrato. Maybe the second one no vibrato at all. The first one with a nice flat hair, when we have the horsehair on the bow. The more hairs that we use, the thicker sound we get. So, and then if I turn the stick on the second one, so I'm using less hairs, you get immediately a darker color. Yeah, so as I said, there's many ways to create different colors, but what needs to happen is that you as the audience members hear those colors, and the jury will be listening out for that too. The second theme of the second movement is this lovely lilting dance number. There's this really quirky moment where it's going along here. It's so unexpected. It sounds like Django Reinhardt to me. It's just suddenly jazzy. Of course, there was no jazz in the 1880s, so Grieg was a bit of a visionary. And then just going to say one thing about the third movement, that Grieg loved his fifths. You know, fifths is this interval. Open sounding interval. Think about all the most famous pieces by Grieg, you know. How about the piano concerto? Peer Gynt Suite, the morning. Or of course in the Hall of the Mountain King. It's all fifths. Now listen to the beginning of the third movement of the sonata. This is what the right hand of the piano does. Left hand of the piano. And the violin part. It's only fifths. So it was quite an obsession Grieg had with fifths. You can decide whether it was a healthy obsession or not. Okay, let's move on to the Franck Sonata, which, as I mentioned, was written just a year before the Grieg. I'm going to play the violin more for this one, give you some examples of different colors and some challenges for the candidates in this piece. So it starts like this, and we have a lot of repetition in the Franck when exactly the same music is played twice. But of course, we'd never want to play it the same way. As Schenker said, semper idem sed non eodem modo. Always the same, but not in the same way. And this is a great way of describing what the candidates need to do. So, here. twice exactly the same. So what can we do? Franck hasn't written any dynamics, so he doesn't give us any clues as to what to do. Say we wanted to make the second one darker, as I said in the Grieg. So the first one we'll play on the A string, which is a brighter string. And the second one, do a nice little slide up on the D string. Of course, there's the vibrato as well. Vibrato gives us different colors. In the Grieg, I talked about maybe trying completely without vibrato. The Franck is quite rich in general. There's not a lot of moments where you would probably use no vibrato, but we could use different types of vibrato. So say the first one uses what we call an arm vibrato, that the vibrato is coming way up from the bicep in the arm. Second one, do like a hand or a finger vibrato, which creates kind of a more shimmering sound. We also have moments where the same note is played multiple times, like this one. And again, there's no dynamics there's no markings that Franck has put in the music to indicate what he wants the violinist to do. But if you listen to what the piano is doing underneath, you hear the chords changing. You hear that beautiful, rich chord there at the end. So probably it's getting richer as it goes along. So even though it's the same note, we could do something where we start on the A string and then slide to the D string. That's something up to Beethoven, including Beethoven. We probably wouldn't want to do that when we're playing the same note. But in the late Romantic music and in Debussy as well, that's very, very much acceptable and quite nice. A nice effect there. Now this Franck, extremely difficult piano part and extremely big, very loud. So another challenge for the violin is to really compete with the piano, be heard at all times. So we need a lot of sustain in the sound. So a moment like this. We have a lot of long down bows when we come from the frog to the tip of the bow. Now the bow is naturally weighted towards the frog. It's heavier down here. So if we don't compensate, if we just play a down bow, I'm just using the same amount of pressure, but it gets weaker as it goes to the tip, so we have to compensate. One thing we could do is we call pronate the arm, turn it inwards as we go towards the tip. And the other thing would be to use the distribution of the bow wisely. So because it's heavier at the frog, we could move slower down here, and as we get to the tip, speed up. Especially here. Really long down bow, important to do those technical things. So listen out for the sustain from the candidate there. And as always in Romantic music, extreme range of emotions, of moods in short periods of time. So the very end of the first movement, we've got, it starts quite passionate in forte, and then in the space of one bar, it just dissipates into a pianissimo. So. One thing we could do to help there, because the violin doesn't really have as big of a dynamic range as the piano, but to kind of make people think that the more is happening than really is dynamically, we can use the vibrato as well, use extremes of vibrato. So during this diminuendo, we'd probably want to cool off the vibrato, which is not so easy when you're playing in a competition and are nervous, but it's quite... It's quite good when we can slow down the vibrato like that. The beginning of the second movement of the Franck, again, super difficult piano part, quite thick, difficult for the violin to compete with the piano. There's a tradition here to play the entire first line of the violin on the G string. So just to show you a passage of that, not on the G string. And then for comparison, to play it on the G string, you'll hear how much richer it is. helps us compete with the piano as we need to do. Franck was from Belgium, one of the Benelux countries, so of course, influence of both German and French cultures and German and French music. So if we think of French music in a way being more ethereal, a lot more, technically speaking, we would use a faster bow speed but not press as hard, whereas the German would be quite thick, would want to be really playing in the string. And Franck goes back and forth with these styles. So if we look at this phrase, it starts very French. And then immediately snaps back to this kind of thick German idea. We have beautiful arching melodies in this piece. Etc. Here we look for a really nice vibrato playing. Sorry, not vibrato. It's too early in the morning. I need coffee. Legato, so smooth. If we're not careful, we might hear clicks at the both ends of the bow, and we're changing direction. So we, as teachers, we always tell our students about how the bow is like a paintbrush on the canvas, doing these kind of strokes. Etc. One of my favorite moments in the whole piece is near the end of the second movement. There's this moment. It's actually not written ritardando, but it's quite a tradition to slow down, to set up this great moment where it starts very slow and soft, and then from there on out, it just builds all the way to the end of the movement. Etc. The challenge here is not to peak too early, not to get too fast or too loud too early, so we can maintain this exciting drive to the end. The very end of the second movement is probably the most difficult spot for the violin to project over the piano. I'm not even going to try playing the piano part there, it's very difficult. But the violin does this. So just have a listen, see if you can hear the violin there. The third movement is a fantasia. Now what this implies is that there must be a lot of rubato playing from both players. Rubato, give time, take time, don't play it straight. So just take the opening violin statement of this movement, which is actually without the piano completely, so it's like a cadenza. Now if I were to play it completely straight, it would sound like this, rhythmically straight. Of course, you'd never hear anyone do that, so just listen out for how the candidate plays with time to tell a story here. This sonata is cyclic in nature, by which I mean the themes come back every movement. So if you think back to that opening statement in the first movement, you hear it again in the third movement, kind of in a dreamlike sequence here. And it's also in a pulse of 2 rather than 3. So at the beginning, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Here it's in 2. 1, 2, 1, 2, etc. The third movement ends with the marking of mesto, sad, very dark. It's an interesting marking Franck puts in there, non troppo dolce, not too sweet, which probably refers to the vibrato. So we wouldn't look for a really thick, rich vibrato there, probably more subtle. Also really interesting voicing there. The violin melodies down here piano's above it. And then we immediately go from that dark moment, and we have to switch moods to something of joy at the beginning of the fourth movement. And this is a canon. Canon is where one voice goes first, and then the other voice plays exactly what the first voice did, just a little bit later. I talked about how sonatas is chamber music, and one has to feed off the other. Well, this is a perfect example. The piano goes first, the violin follows. Etc. And just one more moment I'll talk about. Love this moment. Really rich moment. Again, all about the sustain from the frog to the tip of the bow. We also look out for a really continuous vibrato here. Sometimes if we're shifting from one position to another, we're not focused. Technically, we might stop the vibrato, but to imitate a singer here, we really want the vibrato to continue without stop. Good, all right. Speaking of stop, I think I better make way for these super talented competitors. Thanks for your time, and sorry for my really shoddy piano playing. If anything, I think what I proved is how amazing John Liu and Sarah Watkins are, so please give them a round of applause.